Hello, happy Halloween. I'm going to tell you a spooky local ghost story, a famous one at that. The Dakota is one of the most iconic, mysterious buildings in New York City. Built in 1884, the stunning red brick edifice sits on the corner of 72nd and Central Park West, overlooking the expansive greenery of Central Park. It's an architectural marvel, ornate carvings, and a grand sweeping staircase. The Dakota has been home to many famous residents, including Lauren Bacall, Judy Garland, and John Lennon. But it's also known for something much darker, the legend of the Crying Lady. According to the legend, the Crying Lady is said to be the ghost of a woman who lived in the Dakota many years ago. She was a beautiful, wealthy woman who lived in one of the apartments on the upper floors. She was married to a wealthy businessman who often was away on business, leaving her alone in the apartment for long periods of time. Over time, she grew increasingly lonely and isolated and began to suffer from severe depression. One day she decided she couldn't take it anymore and threw herself out of the window of her apartment, falling to her death on the pavement below. Her husband was devastated by her death and was said to have never fully recovered from the tragedy. It wasn't long after her death, strange things began to happen in the Dakota. Residents reported hearing strange sounds, like the sound of someone crying, coming from the upper floors. Some claimed to have seen ghostly figure of a woman wandering the halls, her face contorted in grief. Over time, the legend of the Crying Lady grew, and her story became one of the most famous ghost stories in New York City. I'm going to retell a story of a local resident who came face to face with the apparition of the Crying Lady. He was invited to a party in one of the Dakota apartments. The apartment belonged to a friend of a friend, and he was excited to have the chance to explore the building. As soon as he stepped off the elevator onto the apartment floor, he felt a strange sensation. It was as if the air was heavy with a sense of sadness, and he couldn't shake the feeling he was being watched. The party was in full swing, and he spent most of the evening mingling with the other guests. As the night wore on, he began to feel more uneasy. The sound of the party seemed to fade away, and he found himself drawn to a corner of the apartment with a large window looking out over Central Park. As he stood staring out into the darkness, he suddenly heard the sound that made his blood run cold. It was the sound of someone crying, coming from somewhere deep within the apartment. At first he thought it was just one of the guests who had too much to drink, but as the sound grew louder, he realized it was something far more sinister. He turned to the others in the room, but no one else seemed to hear the crying. They continued to talk and laugh, oblivious of the ghostly presence in the room. He began to feel like he was going mad, but then he saw her, the Crying Lady. She was standing in the corner of the room, her face contorted in grief. She wore a long, flowing dress that seemed to shimmer in the dim light, and her hair was long and dark, cascading down her back like a waterfall. He could see right through her, but it was so real he thought that he could also reach out and touch her. He stood frozen, staring at the ghostly figure in front of him. The other guests continued to ignore her, as if she wasn't even there, but he knew what he was seeing, and he was filled with a sense of terror and wonder. As he continued to watch, she slowly turned and began to walk towards the door of the apartment. He knew he had to follow her, that he had to find out what she wanted. He pushed his way through the crowd of partygoers and followed her out into the hallway. As he reached the hallway was empty, but he could still hear the sound of her crying coming from somewhere further down the hall. He followed the sound, his heart beating in his chest, until he reached the end of the hallway. There, in front of him, was an open window. He could feel the cold night air, and he could see the lights of the city below, but there was no one there but the ghostly figure of the crying lady standing at the edge of the window ledge. He could feel her pain and her sorrow, her desperation and loneliness. He knew that that was the very window all those years ago she must have jumped from. Maybe she's trapped here, unable to find peace. He reached out, calling to her. It's okay. You could just let go. And then just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. The hallway was silent, and only the sound of the distant hum of the city below remained. He stood there for a few moments, trying to make sense of what just happened. He knew he experienced something truly extraordinary, something he would never forget. And now he knew that the legend of the crying lady in the Dakota was more than just a ghost story. It was a tragedy, a tale of love and loss, and a reminder that sometimes the past is truly never gone. As I said before, since its opening in 1884, the Dakota apartment building has been home to many rich and famous residents of New York City. Among them were John Lennon and Yoko Ono, who moved in 1973. John was also assassinated outside the building in 1980. Before that fateful day, on December 8th, John said he thought he saw the crying lady's ghost walking through the halls, and afterwards his wife, Yoko, who still resides there, claimed that she saw John's ghost sitting at his piano, and he said to her, "Don't be afraid, I'm still with you." Where people live, people die. Through the years there have been many reports of ghosts, and some of these spirits have been seen by multiple people. For instance, the spirit of Judy Holliday. When the actress died, her apartment was renovated. The men working at her apartment felt as if they were being watched closely. I guess Judy wanted to keep an eye on things to make sure they were doing her apartment right. A little girl ghost also haunts the building. She is a regular visitor, and many have seen her. She was in the lower floor windows, but also on other floors. The girl wears period clothing, has blonde hair, and sometimes she's bouncing a red ball. Most of the time she smiles and waves, but people also have heard her speak. She once told a resident that it was her birthday. There's another ghost at the Dakota that many workers and residents have seen. It's a male spirit with an adult body but the head of a young boy. He doesn't speak, he just watches before he disappears. The basement of the Dakota is also haunted. There's a spirit that moves items around, even heavy furniture. Some have claimed that he is the spirit of Edward Cabot Clark because he wears a wig and has a short beard, a long nose, and wire glasses. Clark lived near the Dakota. Perhaps that's why he haunts it. Thanks for joining me this Halloween for our spooky local ghost story. We'll see you soon.